I'm a student. Of course, I'll host a podcast on education.
They dragged me here. It's cold.
Of course, I'm a student. I strongly believe that every child deserves an opportunity to learn.
Who's you pressure?
Of course, I'm Casey. I'm definitely going to talk about education. Duh.
Okay, Casey. Well, everyone, welcome to Amplifying Girls' Voices podcast. So on the 16th of June, we celebrated the Day of an African Child. And the theme was education for all the children in Africa. The time is now. So what I think this theme highlights is the need for inclusive and equitable education for every child in Africa. But let's narrow it down to Zimbabwe. What is the state of education right now?
Okay, let's look at how education in Zimbabwe, fair and fine. We're saying that education is accessible to everyone, but really practically is it? I don't really think it's everyone who's getting the same amount of education. It's everyone who's getting equal types of education. I don't think it's everyone who's even able to go to school in this day and age. I don't know what you think, Hazel.
What's on for you? But I get what you're saying. The quality of education really does vary according to maybe your society, the geographical location, and things like that. For example, if you look at a typical school here in town, you find that they have a computer lab, and then you go to a school maybe deep right in a rural area, and that school doesn't even have tables or chairs or even a room. Kids learn outside under a tree. So when we do actually then come and say that the motto for this year is that education to everyone and education to all, how accessible is it to all different types of people within our nation? Is the quality of the education the same?
That's true. Yeah, taking into consideration education actually is not accessible to everyone. Taking note of marginalized areas, rural areas, such as being Wange rural district, is actually totally different from Bulawayo, from Harare, from Kweru. So at the moment, education is not equal.
So we're saying that in the status quo, education is not really inclusive and equitable.
Yes.
So can we talk about how it is not inclusive? Can we give examples? I think, for example, we can talk about children with disabilities in schools. Do our schools have ramps, or are schools built to accommodate the students?
I think this is one of the issues we've really been talking about for a very long time. I think we've known each other for more than 4 years now. And we're always talking about it. We're always talking about how there's people that are living in our communities. Some, they use sign language, but then the school is located closer to where this person stays, but then there's no sign language in that same school. Now, the kid now has to go into town where they can get a place where sign language is taught. And you're so right, half of the schools, I don't really think they have ramps. If anything, some of the schools are unsafe because they have trenches. Yeah.
I have a different approach to that. I think some schools do try. For example, you find schools with a special needs classroom. The thing is that all these kids with specific needs are being put into one environment, in one classroom, and they require different types of assistance, yet they're being forced into one specific environment. So how effective then is that environment for them? Are they being given enough attention? Are they being being educated the right way, especially according to their own specific preferences?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
An approach by the student to a school, or this guy is actually disabled. One way I give me I feel like Tina, most of the times you don't count us in many activities that are actually done at school. They don't feel the inclusivity part, because kuma sports they are not accommodated, clubs abafakwa. So I feel like bona basuka bebafake esayidini. So
I think the hot topic then becomes, if you're going to say education to all, how do you intend to bring that about? Just telling us that education to everyone is like a statement we've heard since the time of maybe the late President Robert Mugabe and all of that. So then what then is the world doing, particularly at this time, for the girl child, for the African child, to bring education to every single one of us?
I think we need to also understand that there are also policies that are put in place, policies to say that education should be compulsory, every child should go to school. But also, like you said, that how is it then for everyone? How effective are those policies? Do they really accommodate each and every student from different locations with different needs? Is this education that we have, or is the status quo providing education for everyone? Is the access equal?
I really think that it's one of those things where people say, okay, this is what's happening theoretically, but practically it's not the case. Because you are definitely right. When they say that education for all is education for all, then it means that they also have to consider things like distance. How many schools are there in my community?
Guys, there's kids that walk 12 kilometers to school. Imagine.
And then what is the minimum actually the maximum distance that a child is supposed to walk? That's 3 kilometers. And we have kids that are walking for like 12 kilometers. I know the story. I remember the story that you talked about yesterday about the kids that got hit by a bus. And they were cycling to school.
Sharing the same bicycle is not that easy because they have to cycle for more than 12 k's to and from to school, so it's not that easy. Because at the end of the day, we have to figure school umntwana yabe sediniwe. The next thing uyalala kafundanga lutho so mele ubuyele then Monday to Friday same thing akucina ungasabalance ngenxa ukuthi balanda isikolo esi1 esiyabe sikhona.
My chat with that is that then you go to like densely populated areas. For example, if you go to Harare, there's literally a school in every single corner. And then you find that there's places within the same country, within Zimbabwe, where kids have to travel for over 10 k's to get to school. And I feel like that's very unfair. And if we're going to say education for all, first priority should be that. If we're going to say education for all, we're building schools.
Yeah, that reminds me.
Definitely.
Let's talk about the issue of trained and qualified teachers in rural areas.
So we're saying that there is a shortage of the trained teachers.
Yeah. Just imagine ukuthi abantwana indawo yangikhona akula magetsi akula manzi. How many teachers volunteer to go would want to go and teach in such areas?
It aligns again with what Kim was saying. The policies, fine. In theory, guys, let's be honest. They say that things are there. They say that everything is being done right. But then we come practically into reality and we want to see the mechanizing of these policies that they put into place. And then we realize how they do not align at all. In a government school, we are supposed to then hire a person who did only O-level, didn't go to a teacher's college to come and teach. And we are the community who's hiring this person. And this person is not hired by the government or by the ministry. It's really controversial. I feel like this isn't how things are supposed to run. Like, it's a school in the rural areas. The least you could do is provide the best, even overqualified people to come and teach in our community. Yeah.
But like my whole problem, especially when then we talk about education particularly, is that how relevant is it according to us and the global world we're dealing with? So now we're looking at like a world that's focused on AI and things like that. Development has been made to bring in facilities such as Google that make education easier or that make information more accessible. Yet the education that all of us are being fed, and I know all of you are being fed the same education as me, which says cram so that you can pass. You're really just cramming constantly. Karl Marx said this about socialization and whatnot. But then you have then another space or another atmosphere that teaches kids to invent, to say that, no, you know what, instead of cramming that, you could just create an application that allows you to access the information easier. So then how practical is the information we're being taught for the world that we're looking at right now? Because that's also another conversation I feel like is very important if you're going to talk about access to education for an African child that lives in a 21st century.
I think it reminds me of the theme of Africa Day. So it was like education in the 21st century or for the 21st century. I'm kind of forgetting. But then basically in the 21st century, we're looking at globalization and digitalization. So we're looking at a universe where everything is running digital, and yet we have spaces, schools, where you won't even find a single computer or a single laptop. We are learning in schools where you don't have Wi-Fi, but you're supposed to do research for some assignment. We're learning in schools where there are no really practical lessons, but everything is cramming, like you said. And honestly, I don't know. I think that's a gap on its own, because it then puts those first world countries on a higher peak as compared to our third world countries like Zimbabwe, and it's just bad.
So what I'm getting from this conversation is that Africa is still backwards in terms of adapting to the introduction of technology. So when we're now talking about education for all the children in Africa, are we really taking into consideration the fact that the world is shifting, things are going digital? Are we then investing in infrastructure development of these schools to say that it is going to accommodate for these new introductions? Are these schools that we have in Zimbabwe investing in AI?
They invest to an extent whereby they penalize you from getting assignments.
Okay.
As you know, human effort is 0%.
0%.
So I also think that this speaks to the value of education in itself, to say that when we're now done with our education, we're not done with our degrees and with our qualifications, is the value of my degree in Zimbabwe and the value of someone in America the same? Are we able to compete in the same position in the global market? Is that value really the same, or as African children or as Africans, we still need to invest more?
I think in Zimbabwe, our education levels may be very good. Like, there's rigorous instilling of theoretical material. Yes, you see, like you could like memorize a whole counter book of information, right? But all the time when people are hiring, I've taken note, they say you should have digital literacy. You should have skill. You should know how to use a smartphone. Like, when you're going to enroll to a varsity, they're going to tell you to bring a laptop. How are you going to start using a laptop at varsity when your high school didn't have computers?
Just imagine.
It's controversial.
Even if we speak of laptops, what are we saying about areas that don't even have access to networks, don't have access to those laptops or cell phones? We have such schools. So what's the balance?
So you still think that we need to strike a balance? So I think we have talked so much about how the education system is, what the problems are. Now let's try to delve deeper into what we think the government should do, or what we think as young people we should do to maybe try to cover those problems that we have mentioned.
All right. I think it's actually good, especially for people who are actually living in rural areas. We need more schools to accommodate everyone. Just imagine, as we grade 0 to 12 years in rural areas, so that you can manage to walk a 12-kilometer distance. So I feel like we need more schools in rural areas. That's number one. Then number two, I feel like education in rural areas should be provided for free, especially government institutions. Children should be able to access education for free, at least, because the others, due to poverty-stricken homes, they can't even manage to go to school because the parents can't even manage to get $1. So that's the advice. So if at least we can get education, free education in rural areas, that would be a great benefit.
But like, what I get from Lolo is like, essentially education should be free to everyone. If you want to make it more accessible to any child in Zimbabwe, it should be free. I remember when we were talking about the American system, where all public schools are like open and free for everyone that really just wants to learn. I feel like if we had such a climate and such an environment in Zimbabwe, we would allow many kids. Because then, even talking about kids within the city themselves, there's a lot of kids that have dropped out because they can't afford school
yeah.
or whatever. So we feel like if you want to make it more accessible, make it free so that anyone can really just get into an educational facility and learn. On top of that, I feel like it's very essential that we make education equal. If we want to strike a balance, I feel like it's very important that we start investing in schools at any given point and at any place in Zimbabwe. If a school here is going to have 10 laptops, a school deep down in, I don't know, Kwekwe, in rural Kwekwe, should have 10 laptops as well. It should not be segregated to particular places or whatever. If education is going to be accessible to an African child in Zimbabwe, it must be equal and fair.
Yeah. Okay, well, my call to action will start with an acknowledgement. I think we highly do acknowledge whatever efforts that the government has been putting. We highly acknowledge everything that they're doing. However, we do say that education really should be free, because now, just because I'm a girl, just because they cannot afford to pay for my fees, just because there's climate change and there's drought and there's a bunch of terrible things that are happening in our environment, it means that because our family wants to sustain us, they're going to end up wedding me to some other family which actually has money, just so that they can sustain their own survival, right? Now, that means that the whole thing of us trying to reach equality is now at an imbalance. Because I'm a girl, I'm the one who's going to have to sacrifice for another person. Such that this means that if education was free, it means that they're not going to do that, because they know that I'm probably going to be that one person who's going to bring our family out of poverty and into a greater survival. So the call to action is, like they have said, we need free education. Education is a right, it's a fundamental principle. Yeah.
That's true. Then again, we have an issue of making follow-ups. We notice that mostly, especially in rural areas again, you notice that umntwana wafunda from grade 0 up to 7 or up to form 2. Then isehanja sesiyatshadiswa sothiwa because you're a girl child, you can't continue with school, it's better uyelobolwa. Then your brother continues, he's the only one we can afford to pay fees for. So I feel like the government has to put measures whereby they make a follow-up on children or children who are actually dropping out from school. Kwenzela ukuthi kuyazakala ukuthi wayephumile esikolo kuhambe njani and stuff, because the girls out there, they're actually vulnerable. I don't wanna lie. They face such situations. So those measures are actually very crucial.
But like, I have a question. I feel like we talk so much. We talk about how maybe the government has to play a huge role in making sure that we access education. What efforts do we as young people then put to also access education at the same time? Are we utilizing the spaces and the places that are there? You find that there's so many apps that you can learn different skills from. You can learn your math from and all of these things. Do we even utilize them? They're available, but we don't want to use them. So I feel like we also have a very important and pivotal role to play when it comes to our own education. And we need to utilize it, because even if they do open up schools to allow anyone to learn, you could simply choose not to go there if you don't value education. So if you want to access education, I feel like it's important that we see a value within education. I know I complain about school a lot, but I feel like we should acknowledge that to a degree. It's very important.
Yeah. So what I'm getting from Heather is that the burden should not be on the government alone. I think as young people, we also need to understand. And also, I think sometimes the government can introduce these programs where they want to assess whether the policy that they implemented is working or not, and you find young people not attending. So I think as young people, we should research more and know more, and also contribute to this discussion so that whatever policies are coming into place, they accommodate us and they are for us and they cater for us as students and as African children. So I think with this being said and done, if we don't have anything more to say, Hazel, do you have anything more to say?
We want to go and drink tea.
Because it's winter. So this is the end of our podcast. Please like, comment, and subscribe. We know you are a student. We know there are things that you want to address. That comment section is for you. And this is me signing out.
Bye.